Good morning, everyone. I welcome you to the Personnel Board Committee meeting, the regular monthly meeting for September. I would like us to please stand and say the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, so for the purpose of the meeting, I'd like everybody in the room to introduce themselves. So Michelle, we'll start with you, go around here and then move that way.
Michelle Jervis, Administrative Assistant.
Mary Beth Marziotti, Personnel Board Member.
Lorna Wade, Personnel Chair.
Joan Gardecki, Vice Chair.
John Ruder, Town Administrator.
Don Jacobs, Consultant.
Okay.
Conrad Allen, Warner.
Good morning, everybody. The first item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes for August 27th, 2020. I don't know if everybody had a chance to read them.
I read them. I'll make a motion to accept the minutes.
I'll
as
second.
written.
All right, a motion to accept the minutes as presented. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? And just so that gives you some parameters, you said your name was Mr. Johnson?
No, Don Jacobs.
Jacob, sorry. That we have about an hour. I have another meeting in another town at 11:15 for your presentation. And if we don't handle the second item, which is sexual harassment, it's not an item for motion or for just a discussion. So if that doesn't happen, we'll table it to the next meeting if that's all right with everybody else. Is there any opposition to that?
Nope.
All right, Mr. Jacobs, we're
you.
ready
Good
to hear
morning.
your presentation.
Yeah, I tell you, when I woke up this morning and I said to my wife I was coming to the town of Dudley, she said, "You going where?" I haven't gone anywhere in 6 months. I still remember how to get here, though.
That's good.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. John, do you want to make any open comments? Anything?
So, just real quick, Mr. Jacobs completed a salary survey and classification study for us. And now we're at the point where I'd like to bring it forward. One of the things I'd like to start off with is to have the Personnel Board at least hear how Mr. Jacobs would propose to classify different employees in different grades and steps. Well, actually, different grade classifications, so that we at least have a starting point. And then, based on the recommendations of the board, we'll bring this forward to the Board of Selectmen and try to move forward.
So you are looking for a motion after this is presented as far as whether we are recommending this or not?
Well, at least let's start off step by step. Let's look at the class, let's have Mr. Jacobs go through the whole thing, and then we'll look at least the class, the way
Okay.
he proposes to classify employees. And
All
then
right.
we can take it step by step from
All
there.
right, great.
All right, so, Madam Chairman, if I could, let me, I always like to first begin by telling you a little bit more about who I am, where have I come from, and what's my background. But basically, I always describe myself, I've been in the business of local government now for, believe it or not, more than 40 years. That's a long time. But for the last 20 years, I've had my own municipal consulting company, and I spend, these days, all of my time, I used to say 80, 90%, but it really is now 100% of my time, on the issue of how to pay positions and pay employees. I always begin by sharing, particularly with boards and other people that may or may not be familiar with local government, or to whatever extent they might be familiar, by sharing with them at least what my experience, what my observations have been over those 20 years. And I've done almost, at this point, probably literally more than 150, and I'm really understating that number, what are called classification and compensation studies. Classification compensation means how to pay a position, and secondly, how to pay an employee, okay? The word classification means to compare positions to one another, not based on dollars and cents, but based on some other criteria, and to do it, quote unquote, in a consistent way. So just so that we're comfortable with the word classification. And obviously compensation means to pay, again, both positions and employees. what we're talking about, so no matter where I've ever gone, and I've done these kinds of studies literally all over the country. I live in Massachusetts. Probably 75% of the work I've ever done is here in Massachusetts or in New England. But I've had the opportunity to travel to places I'd never thought in my life I'd ever go, like Weslaco, Texas, or someplace in Florida or Virginia. The only reason I mention that to you is that it makes no difference where I am. Literally makes, I mean, other than it's different. But the issue is the same. There's one basic similarity that applies to the town of Dudley as it does to any other municipality I've ever been in, no matter how large or small it might be. So size isn't the issue. Number of employees isn't the issue. How wealthy a community might be is not the issue. The issue is communication and the lack of it. Okay? Every single municipality, including this one, that is the number one issue. Make no mistake about it. What I haven't been asked to do, and I've never really been asked to do, is to in any way comment on or evaluate or recommend what the town of Dudley can afford to spend on anything. Okay? That's my way of saying it's not about how much money, but I would submit to you it is about how you want to spend the money. Again, to pay a position and pay an employee. So when I say it's about communication, what I'm really talking about, if you look at how the town of Dudley today pays positions and employees, we're talking about non-union positions, okay? But frankly, you could say the same thing about union positions. It really doesn't make that much difference, other than they're paid differently. And I'm assuming the board knows that. You've seen the police contract, or if you haven't, take a look at it, and you'll see that that's different than how you currently today are paying positions and employees, non-union position and employees. Now, there's nothing to say that you can't pay people differently, or you have one group paid one way and another. The key in either case is, can you explain it? So if I were a brand-new employee with the town of Dudley, and I were applying for a position, any position, no matter what it is, full-time, part-time, 10 hours, 20 hours, that's not the question, or that's not the issue. The issue is, how are you going to pay me? How are you going to pay the position? And then secondly, how are you going to pay me as an employee? That question really cannot be answered today in a consistent way so that I, myself, or any other employee could understand it. Not that whether I agree or disagree, no matter what you tell me, I want more money. That's not what I'm saying, okay? It's not about, I don't mean to be facetious saying, but it's not about making people happy, quote unquote. But it is about helping them understand how they're going to be paid, again, their position and their employee. And I don't mean to run on about that, but that is the number one issue. Make no mistake about it. So as a personnel board, what is absolutely critical from my perspective, I can just give you my point of view for what it's worth, is really what we're saying to you this morning is that it's critically important for you to understand the process. We're not asking you to pay someone. We're not asking you to determine how much the town can afford, because that's not what, correct me if I'm wrong, that's not what the personnel board's charge is, correct? But as an advisory board to the selectmen and to town meeting, or particularly to non-union employees, I think from my point of view, and I assume I would speak for an employee's perspective, it is important for you to be able to understand how the town is going about doing that. So when I first came to town, and I can't remember exactly when that was, it was a while ago. Yeah? Jeez. John didn't have gray hair back then. No, it wasn't that long. When I first met with John and your employees, and I've met with all of your non-union employees, at least the majority of them, the basic question I asked was how you're doing it today, right? How you're paying employees and how you're paying positions. And the bottom line is, in 20 years, and I've been doing this now for more than 20 years, I've never, ever had anyone answer that question, including the town of Dudley. And I don't say that negatively, so please, I'm not here to, throw anybody, I'm not here to be negative at all, but I'm just trying to state a fact that hopefully as a result of this study, that won't happen again. Now, that's not a dollars and cent issue. It's not a cost issue, right? It's an issue of, how you communicate to me as an employee or the citizens or, to yourselves and so on and so forth, which is why I keep saying it's about communication. It's about understanding and agreeing, everyone that has a vested interest in how you pay positions and pay employees, one should be able to understand how the town of Dudley is going to do this going forward. And secondly, if you disagree with the process, then you should ideally, hopefully, have the opportunity to voice an opinion, a concern. Well, I don't understand what you're doing, right? Or, in terms of how it's affecting me personally, I disagree with how you're paying my position. But in order to even be able to disagree or respond or react to a plan of any kind, you first have to understand the process. And so, and we'll get into the plan itself in a minute. So I've given the town a report over and above, in addition to, how positions are to be paid and how employees are to be paid. And the employee part we haven't finished. There's a set of policies, what I call administrative policies, that are in that report. And again, I mention that to the board because that is one of your roles and responsibilities, is to recommend policy. Okay? There is a set of policies that basically have been written to describe what we've done in conducting the study. So I'm not sure what's in your packet today, but those set of policies, what I call administrative policies, are in the report. And I would encourage you, maybe at your next meeting or between now and whenever, take a look at those policies. Because I've asked your Board of Selectmen, when I first met with them, I said, look, when it's all said and done, you have a plan presented to you, at least as the outsider, so to speak, what I'm asking you as a Board of Selectmen to do is to approve a set of written guidelines. It tells everyone and anyone how you pay positions and how you pay employees. And also identifies who's responsible for what. And by the way, now that I just said that, I also remind myself, one of the biggest concerns about managing compensation that I have, and I've been on both sides of the table. I used to be a town manager. I used to have to make these kinds of decisions. I know firsthand what it feels like to be uncomfortable, to try to explain to somebody, why we're paying you less than or more than someone else. I've been there and done it for more than 12 years, so I know that feeling. It's not a good feeling, believe me. Hopefully that'll never happen, right? I should be comfortable enough and understand how we're doing it so that I can explain it to you. And then whether you agree or disagree, again, that's another issue. So understanding the process is absolutely essential. So the first document I want to walk you through, or just show you, and I think it's in your pack, is very simply goals and objectives. It's a one-page piece of paper. It's, in that, it's the first, or page 1. No, you jump right by it. Yeah, right by it. There you go. Turn to the first page. Flip it over. No, it's in that packet.
It's in a, Conrad, it's in this packet right here, that's colored.
Oh, okay.
You have color,
Yeah.
just
First
as
page.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You can staple it on the right.
Not me. I didn't staple anything. There you go, you got it now, okay. So, again, very simply, the word goal means the purpose of the study, why we're doing this, why does the town have a compensation plan? And I've just put a one-sentence statement in there that I think really kind of encapsulates, a goal by definition doesn't go away, it doesn't have a time frame, or it's not necessarily time-bound. If you don't want to do this anymore, then obviously the goal would go away. But otherwise, if you're going to pay employees, which obviously you have to do, the purpose of paying people is to classify and compensate them. And again, the word classify, as I said before, means to compare them to one another, not based on just dollars and cents. And I put in parentheses what I think are the two key words, what I call standards, that any aspect of compensation needs to meet. And that is consistency. The word consistent means you can explain it, okay? And then secondly, competitiveness. Now, those are two terms right now the town of Dudley does not comply with. You're not doing it consistently, and you don't know whether you're paying people competitively. That should never happen again. And again, that's not a dollars and cents issue. That's a quality of, operation or management issue. And we're looking at compensation both internally, obviously, as well as externally. So no matter what we're talking about, what I would submit to you that any aspect of this, of compensation, any and all, needs to meet those two standards of consistency. You don't have to do it consistently, but you need to be able to explain why not, okay? And then secondly, competitiveness. Well, we have to define that word competitive. so that we all agree and understand what we mean by the term. And, you know, no matter what you tell me, I'm not being paid competitively. You know, I always want more. Again, that's not what we're talking about today. So the three objectives you see listed here are the three things that have been done. So when I was hired by the town, what I proposed to do was to write accurate job descriptions. The word accurate means describing what someone is required to do today, you know, so-called essential functions or primary duties, whatever you want to call them. And secondly, accurate also means the minimum qualifications. What we mean by that phrase, the knowledge, the skill, the ability I need to have to do whatever it is I'm doing. Me personally, right? Which may or may not be similar, I'm just not used to using a mask, to what someone else is doing. There may be some similarities, there may be some overlap, but when you look at the knowledge, the skill and the ability, all of that information needs to be put into a job description. So let me just quickly touch on the process we followed to do that, to accomplish that first objective. So it's spent, and I always say, you know, if you look at this as three parts, writing accurate job descriptions, developing a classification plan, and then thirdly, a compensation plan, that first objective is the most important part of the study. And sometimes people don't understand that, or, you know, they don't recognize or appreciate the fact that the job description document is written, whether you're a public or private employer, no matter who you might be, it's important to have a written document that describes those minimum qualifications and how they compare to one another is basically how we develop a classification plan. So everything is driven by, in terms of comparing positions, primarily by the job description, which is why it's so important. So one of the purposes of the job description is to communicate to the employee how your position is being ultimately compared or classified, you could use either word, to another position. And the only reason I say it to you that way is to try to, right from the get-go this morning, try to put the market data, the compensation, the dollars and cents in its proper perspective. It's important. It's part of the study. So don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying that dollars and cents is not important. It is important, obviously. But I would submit to you, as you get to understand the process overall in terms of, again, paying positions and employees, it's important to understand, well, how are we using market data? How are we using rates of pay? And as you'll see, there's actually a third criteria that we proposed, that we used in defining the word competitive, and that's how long someone's been in their current position. Okay, so I don't mean to jump around, but that word competitive that I said earlier we need to define, we actually define it using those three criteria. Okay? Any questions? I don't mean to, you know, just keep rambling on, as you can tell. I used to be a town manager, so I suffer from town manager's disease.
I do have a question, Don.
Yeah, please.
When you're classifying people, are you comparing apples and apples? When you say a clerk, any kind of clerk, and you compare it to Webster, Sturbridge, Charlton, Oxford, do you have their job classifications?
No, that's a good question. The first objective is to compare what someone does here in the town of Dudley to what other people in the town of Dudley are doing. That's the first step, not the marketplace. So what a clerk might be doing in Webster or Oxford or any other place, that's not the first question we ask, because that's really part of external equity as opposed to internal. So the first objective is to define and develop a process to deal with internal equity, how people compare to one another within the town of Dudley.
So can I assume that you developed accurate job descriptions, and from the accurate job descriptions, you then developed a classification plan based
Exact-
on the responsibilities and the scope of the position?
That's right. And we're getting into more specifically how we described or defined that in a second. But that's exactly right. One leads to the other. So first we wrote accurate job descriptions, which involved having each employee fill out a questionnaire, telling us where they spend the bulk of their time, what, in their opinion, are the minimum qualifications. And on that document, that questionnaire, department heads or supervisors, as the case may be, the last page of the document gave them an opportunity to comment on. So there's checks and balances built into the process. So I don't want you to sort of picture in your mind an employee being able to say anything and everything he or she wants to say. They have that opportunity if they want to, but that's not what happens.
So does supply and demand come into effect at all?
No, not yet, not
I
yet.
mean, I know the unemployment is 8.4%.
Right.
But it's not really when you try and go out and get.
Right, but now you're talking about the marketplace.
Right.
We're not there yet.
Sorry, I'm on page 4.
No, but that, I'm glad you're raising those, yeah, right, exactly. That is ultimately the concern, obviously. You know, are the dollars and cents aspect of compensation, whether it's the market data, the unemployment rate, what the actual rate of pay might be, and so on and so forth. And we'll get to that in a minute, if you just bear with me for just a couple more minutes. So the three things, that you see, three objectives, those are the three things that have been done. So the first two objectives don't cost the town any money. Writing a job description by itself doesn't obligate the town of Dudley to spend anything, obviously, right? So whether the position's filled or not, the point being, we want to link the job description to what the town, the employer, requires the employee to do. One of the things that John shared with me right at the beginning, and I can remember probably the first time we met, was he shared with me several positions, particularly in the town hall, I believe, where their responsibilities were changing, for whatever the reasons, good, bad, or indifferent, right? And really, what John said to me at that time was that he as town administrator, was looking for a process to link those changes in job duties, responsibilities, to compensation. Because right now, the way the town has been paying positions, you're paying the position and the employee the same amount of money. So if I were to ask you how you're paying the fire chief, or the police chief, or the town administrator, or anyone, right? The best you could tell me would be, well, we're paying them X amount of dollars. Which is what I alluded to when I began my remarks about being able to explain, well, why is my dollar amount different than yours? How'd you do that, right? What was the process you followed to make that determination? And right now, I always like to say, you can't take the subjectivity out of compensation. Somebody has to make a decision, good, bad, or indifferent again, and that's a very subjective decision, whether it's a board or individual or what have you. So subjectivity is always part of the process. You can't, it's not formula driven. Sometimes people think, you plug in the number and you get the answer at the end, the end result. That's not the way this process works. So once we'd written job descriptions, then, as the chairman indicated, we then developed a classification plan, which we'll get to next. Once we had done that, then we collected market data, as I mentioned, as one of the three criteria that we're using to define competitive, in order to develop a quote-unquote compensation plan. So when I use the term compensation plan, what I mean by that today, as I said to begin with, is how you pay a position, not the employee, okay? And it's defined, as you'll see, and if you've looked at the plan, you've seen it, by a salary range, minimum, maximum salary range. So there's two basic things from a structural plan standpoint that I'm suggesting the town of Dudley establish or adopt. One is a grade level plan that John mentioned earlier, a classification plan, grade levels, which again are driven by the job descriptions. Okay? How you write that job description determines how that position is going to be classified, in addition to the market data and the rate of pay of the employee and how long he or she has been in their current position. And we'll get to those three criteria in a minute. So the number of grade levels, right, is intended to match your organizational structure. If you were to draw an org chart of the town of Dudley today, whether it's one department or what I'm suggesting, the whole town, all the positions that make up the town of Dudley, putting aside the school department, okay, because they're not part of the study. So whether it's union and non-union, doesn't make any difference. Who reports to whom is what an organizational chart should show you, okay? Another way to say that is obviously the different levels of responsibility. So the classification plan, the grade level structure, is not, it's not done in a vacuum, so to speak. Just the opposite. The check and balance to whether it's accurate or not is your organizational structure.
So clarification,
Sure.
I'm assuming therefore that you have the person with the most responsibility for how the town functions and the number of people that they oversee beneath them. is at the top, and then it goes down according to the level of responsibility. So you start here and it comes down in a pyramid shape.
That's right.
All right.
It isn't just the number of people you supervise, though. That's only one of the criteria. That's one aspect of knowledge, skill, and ability.
This, when I'll pass this along, that says exactly what he's talking about.
Right, right, and we'll get to the characteristic chart next. But I want to just give you a feel for, again, the process, without looking at any numbers or anything else. But again, Madam Chairman, you're absolutely correct. When you think about, let me say it a little bit differently, when I look at it strictly as compensation, and again, we're talking about paying positions, not yet the employee, okay? What I would submit to you, as you'll see in the proposed plan, the position that's paid the most amount of money and compared to another position, or more than or less than, is basically determined by the job description. It's that simple. It's meant to be simple, all right? And by the way, this whole concept that I'm sort of describing to you, or trying to describe to you, I didn't invent it. I mean, I wish I could say I copyrighted it. I probably wouldn't be sitting here right there. It's a process that's been around for quite a long time. All the municipalities, and I say all of them, whether you're talking about Massachusetts or anywhere else in the United States, pretty much has adopted or established a process similar to what we're outlining today. The only difference, that I've ever seen over the 20 years wherever I've gone, might be the number of grade levels and how they've determined them, or where they got the dollars and cents from, putting aside, again, the employee part of it, okay? But the concept, philosophically or whatever, conceptually, actually came out of the private sector, believe it or not. Where the private sector really was trying to develop, and when we're talking about back in probably the 1950s or somewhere along that line, they needed a process to be able to pay people different amounts of money based on basically what they were doing, okay? And the public sector really copied that. It came out of, as I said, the private sector. So the three objectives you see there, they've all been done. What I want to, just jump around, is what I want to draw your attention to move this thing along, and I'm sorry I'm taking so long, is the characteristic chart. All right, it's a Word document, and you can see right up at the top of the page, it says characteristic chart. No, it's just like this. It should have come right after yeah. Everybody have it? There you go.
Positions, classification,
Was it in your packet?
classification, yeah, right here. Looks like this.
Yeah, there you go.
Got it.
Everybody have it? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Could I ask you a quick question?
Yeah, sure.
When you're working in Massachusetts as opposed to other states, does Proposition 2.5 come into any bearing?
Not at all.
Thank you.
Not at all. Not in the slightest. Well, actually, not as far
It
as,
does in funding.
well, there's a huge difference, obviously, between municipalities in Massachusetts, let alone other states. It comes into play, obviously, when you look at, what you can afford,
Right.
okay? But does it affect this study? Not at all.
Gotcha.
Not in any way, shape, or form, okay? What the tax rate might be, what the property values might, where the revenue comes from for a town of Dudley, into Massachusetts under Prop 2.5 and all that kind of stuff, which I'd be happy to get into, it's a separate conversation. Yeah, it affects how much the town can afford to spend, no question. But I would submit to you, the purpose of this study was not to determine, again, how much the town can afford. The purpose of the study is to recommend a way to spend the money, and to spend it the most effective way possible. If you look at it purely from a self-interest standpoint, you could be an employee, you could be a taxpayer, you could be whoever you are, right? Whatever your interest is in compensation. What I would submit to you is, who wouldn't want to spend the money the most effective, best way possible?
Politicians.
No, that's not true. Now, they may define best
Look at the
differently.
federal government then.
No, well, with all due respect, when you say politician, look, the Board of Selectmen, let's say, they're your local politicians, right? Or any other elected official.
I'm getting you off on.
No, I know, but I know that it's sort of like the elephant in the room kind of thing. I know it's here, trust me, and I'm not trying to ignore it. All I would say to you, how you define best, You may have one definition, I have another, and this person has a third. You see what I'm saying? So right away, the issue there is we're not doing it consistently.
I spent 42 years.
All right, so you know what I'm talking about. All right.
Don, I've quickly looked over the characteristic chart, and one of the things I don't see, and maybe the Board of Selectmen do not want that direction, but no mention of, under educational level, certain number of years of work experience, which would perhaps take the place of an educational level.
That's a good civil service. But now you're talking about the employee. So I have 10 years of experience, and can I use those 10 years in place of who's the most qualified person to
Well, that's
hire?
what I'm saying. It doesn't appear that it gives any latitude for the Board of
It's not
Selectmen
part of the process at all.
to consider that.
I understand what you're saying, and that's obviously a very legitimate question, but that applies to who you want to hire and what the minimum qualifications are. We're talking about the position now.
All right.
In fact, have you worked in New York State?
Honey?
Have you worked in the state of New York?
No, I've been union representative for teachers in Connecticut for 17 years.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that. Well, I've done work in Connecticut. The reason I asked you about New York State, in New York State, not to get off track here, guys, I've done a lot of work in New York State. In New York State, every single municipality, including the city of New York, has to follow the New York State civil service system relative to the job description. In other words, relative to the minimum qualifications to apply for a position. Every single municipality, county, city, town, village, you name it, right? In the whole state of New York has to follow Albany. Every single one. And that has absolutely nothing, zero, to do with how you pay the position or how you pay the employee. Yet every municipality, so what happens in New York is that municipalities have two sets of job descriptions. One, civil service, describing the issues that the chairman just raised. You can substitute X number of years' experience for a bachelor's degree or a minimum of type of experience or what have you might be. But those are all issues related to the who's the most qualified person to hire. And obviously, that's not what we're talking about today, okay? So, very quickly, all I've done is outline for you what we're recommending is 5 grade levels be established, 6 grade levels be established, depends on what town I'm in. And so how do we get 6 grade levels? That's the first question, really, right? And what this characteristic chart does is outline for you the characteristics that define each grade level. And I've put in bold print what I think is the most important characteristic in each grade level, okay? So you notice, let's look at grade level 1. What you don't see underlined is the education level. It's not the most important, okay? What is the most important characteristic in grade level 1 is what we've called direct supervision. And we've put in there a phrase right after that that explains to you what we mean by the phrase direct supervision. It says clear, detailed instructions govern the work or are explained with each assignment. It's entry level. In other words, when you look at the job duties of a position in grade level 1, the employee is pretty much doing the same thing all the time.
For example, not the head custodian, but a custodian. It falls under the direction, go sweep the floor. Go, that sort of direct supervision is
Could be.
is a grade level 1.
Could be, or, again, I've seen custodial positions, depending upon the complexity of the building they're managing or cleaning or
Right,
whatever.
it could be a mechanical position. all the way
Yeah,
up
I
to
mean,
the-
but that's a good example. So grade level 1, so the first thing I did with John was develop these characteristics, the grade levels, and then we went back and put positions into what we think is the accurate or correct grade level, not the other way around, okay? So what I'm suggesting to you this morning is the first thing you need to be comfortable with are the characteristics that define each of these grade levels. So let's just jump to grade level 2.
Can I just interject
Yeah,
one more
sure.
time? So this is, again, this is for the position itself. It's not necessarily, if somebody has a grade 4 or 5 levels amount of knowledge and they apply for a grade level 2 position, you don't classify them as a grade 5 because they have that level of knowledge. It's specific to the position in terms of the classification characteristics.
I'm looking at your grade 4 here. It says works under the administrative direction of the town administrator. I can think of 3 or 4 positions here that don't do that.
Well, but it goes on, if you look at, can I just take it one grade level at a time, just so you get a
I
sense?
keep jumping to different pages.
Well, that's all right, I'm happy to answer your question, but I'm trying to do it somewhat sequentially, so that the board has a sense, or everyone has a sense of what the different levels of responsibility. You've jumped to, obviously, grade 4 as opposed to grade 5 and all that kind of thing. So the difference between grade level 1 and 2, direct supervision versus general supervision. General supervision means, when you look at the job description, you look at the job duties of a position in grade level 2 as opposed to grade level 1, you wouldn't necessarily see the employee doing the same thing all the time. But everything they do is governed by, as it says here, an established rule, regulation, law, policy, what have you. They have to know which policy, which law to follow. So a little bit more responsibility, okay, between grade level 1 and grade level 2. And again, it's not the education level that's the primary characteristic. It's not to say you couldn't have somebody in grade level 1 that has an associate's degree, or might even have a bachelor's degree, because you felt that person was the most qualified to hire. Once again, we're talking about the position, not the employee. Grade level 3, it says general direction, as opposed to general supervision or direct supervision. And you can see how simple this is. General direction means you could ask an employee in a position in grade level 3 pretty much to do anything and everything you feel they need to do based on their experience and or their qualifications. And again, the word qualification means knowledge, ability, and skill. They have to figure out what to do and how to do it. It could be a brand new responsibility or job duty they've never done before. Well, you would expect someone in grade level 3 to be able to figure out how to do it. And they might also have, if you notice the last bullet, that's bold print, is you might have someone be a work leader. Work leader means give direction and guidance to other employees, required to do that, not because they want to, they're required to do it. They're required to know how to do that. You're the most senior person in the group. One of your responsibilities is to train new employees. Or if they have a question about what's the proper way to do something, what policy, what law, whatever it might be, a work leader has that, but a work leader does not hold people accountable. A work leader does not take disciplinary action, okay? And again, we're always describing different levels of responsibility. Grade level 4, to get to grade level 4, you see the phrase administrative direction, and it says of the town administrator, or it could be, you know, again, Dudley is a relatively small community. The point is, when I use the phrase department head, another way to describe or define department head means you're responsible for a function. You're responsible for a service that's being provided. I might report directly to a board, right? And maybe not the town administrator. You know, if you ask the library director, who does she report to? Typically, library director is the last person they typically say is the town administrator. Even though administratively they do, I would, in my opinion, they put a budget together and the budget goes to the town administrator. But they have a board of trustees, right, that oversees the policies and how the library operates. In fact, they're probably the hiring authority, okay? Although, again, I'm not that familiar with your library position. And the other key word is, you notice, is the last bullet, managerial level of supervisory responsibility. Manager means you're responsible not just for what the employees do or don't do, but you're responsible for the function. You're responsible for the department. You would expect to see in the job description, responsible for department results, or words to that effect. Not just what the employee does, or not just what you as an individual does, as, say, the department head, okay? Much higher level of responsibility. And grade level 5, again, works under the administrative direction of the town administrator, what we call a major department of the town. The word major is defined in the rating system, and I don't know how familiar you are with, I should have asked you at the beginning, have you guys seen a point rating system? Do you know the concept? So when I use the phrase point rating system, what I'm talking about is, and again, it's a concept that came out of the private sector. Point rating system means you have a set of criteria, minimum qualifications, education, experience, supervisory responsibility, both in terms of supervision being exercised as well as supervision received, the judgment or independence required. Our rating system, the one I wrote literally 20 years ago, has 13 rating criteria. education experience. And there's a chart in here that explains to you, what each criteria means. But most of them are pretty straightforward. There are some criteria that when you look at the typical job advertisement, you'll see minimum education experience, maybe even substitute years of experience for an education level, whatever. Well, what you typically don't see described in a job advertisement are the other aspects of responsibility. Or another word to use is accountability. In other words, what are you accountable for in carrying out your job duties? So you could use that word responsible or accountable almost interchangeably. All I'm saying is that level 5, as opposed to level 4, are more complex. That's what the word major means, and we define it. So complexity is defined in a couple of different ways. It could be the number of people you supervise. That is one aspect of complexity. Another basic aspect would be, that function you're managing, that department, i.e., let's say a police department compared to a board of assessors. Now that I know I've got an assessor sitting next to me. Usually I like to pick on police chiefs, but I don't mind picking on assessors. The nature of a police department, 24/7, hey, they carry a gun, right? They put their lives on the line every single day. Whereas the last time I checked, assessors don't do that. At least I hope not. They may think they are sometimes. When you go and knock on that door, it's never a fun experience. But the point being that the position police chief, the manager of the police function, when you look at that function and what it entails and what, it's straightforward. It's pretty much understood. Where this gets a little bit more, maybe a little bit complicated in a sense, the IT function in a lot of organizations winds up being, if not the most important, one of the top one. But when you typically look at an IT department, they don't usually have a lot of people because it's IT driven usually typically. But the importance, the accountability aspect of the IT function is right up at the top, right? We can't exist or survive without it.
I guess I like the word accountability much more than responsibility, because accountability is the proof is in the pudding, and that's the accountability. So I could have some responsibilities that I don't maintain, so therefore I'm not accountable.
No, you're absolutely right.
So I think accountability is,
Yeah, it might
like
be
that
a
term
more
so.
accurate or a more descriptive term that's consistent with what we're, really talking about. And you're absolutely right. I mean, I could have, I could oversee all the, I'm thinking of the custodian. I have 10 custodians reporting to me, in a hypothetical organization. But when you look at the nature of the custodial service in terms of the accountability aspect of it, if the heating system breaks down, you're not expected to fix it. You're expected to pick up the phone and call somebody who knows how to fix it. Okay? Whereas if I am responsible for fixing it, if I'm expected to have that knowledge, that certification, mechanic in a lot of police and fire departments, public works departments, some of them actually repair public safety vehicles. Well, in order to do that, you have to have a certain certification, right, in order to repair a public safety vehicle. When your fire department has to repair the pumper, they don't do it in-house. They either send it out, they have somebody else come in who has that certification because of the nature of public safety, all right? Whereas if it's a regular Class D, motor vehicle, well, that's not considered to be that complex.
Excuse me, John, I have to run.
Yeah. Thank you. Nice to meet you. So grade level 5, again, are basically your managers, right? And you know who those are. Whereas grade level 6 has a managerial responsibility, but is also responsible for the development of policy, reporting directly to the policy board, which means the highest responsible board, which are your selectmen in this form of government. Okay? And so already, by definition, without even looking at the plan, it tells you, me, and everybody where the town administrator falls. Right? But just keep in mind that what you see now in terms of the proposed grade level structure, positions being recommended to a particular grade level, is my opinion. And that's all it is. You could obviously have a different opinion, just as anyone else could, and that's perfectly okay. But the bottom line is that if you want to change the grade level of a particular position, what you're going to need to do in order to explain it You know, I think a position should be a grade level 2, not grade level 1, or 3, not 2, or whatever the case might be. You just need to go back and look at the characteristic chart without having to get into as much detail as John needs to be able to do, relative to how to apply points in order to develop a hierarchy or a point structure, or what we call a bandwidth that defines each grade level. In other words, behind this grade level chart you have in your packet, and you can see there's a total number of points, right? Okay, you see the total points? Behind those total points is another chart that I don't think you have, that's a detailed chart. Has all the points, all 13 grade level rating criteria, that tells you how the accounting assistant got rated at 135.
It's not it. Is this
No,
it?
that's the compensation.
This is this one.
There you go. Oh, and the chart you have doesn't have a total number. So, yeah, the one you have just has the grade level, recommended
The ones
grade
in the
levels.
book.
So,
Right.
when you look at grade level 1, whether it's the library aide or the custodian as compared to the clerk position in any of the departments, the clerk position has been rated, again, at that second level of responsibility, not the first, not as an entry level. Whereas the custodian position has been rated consistent with the characteristics that define grade level 1. So all you need to do is, you know, at your leisure, is with the grade level plan in front of you, just use the characteristic chart as an explanation as to what each grade level means. Okay? Don't get hung up on the point aspect of it.
So, Jonathan, a laborer on level 2, that would be a highway laborer? Because I think if it was custodian, it would stay custodian.
Yeah, it's a position that does labor work, but also does custodial work, if I remember correctly.
So is
Right,
this-
instead of
level-
being strictly direction-driven, there's some level of knowledge and ability to.
Okay, all right.
Right.
So to answer your question, and that's a very good question, or questions like that, the only thing you're missing is the job description, right? Remember, the job description is going to give you more detailed information.
Exactly.
And as I said earlier, to begin with, now I think you can appreciate and understand how the job description ties into this, okay? So everything we're talking about right now, that we've been talking about up until now, no, we haven't mentioned anything about dollars and cents other than the former assessor. So that's the classification plan. Very simply, to understand it, you just need to use this characteristic chart. So in my opinion, when I got to know what everybody's doing here, the non-union positions, and I went back and compared them to one another, you can see now how I backed into what's now been recommended as 6 grade levels, 6 levels of accountability, okay? And once again, the check and balance to that, is the number 6 correct or not, would be the org chart if you had one, which unfortunately you don't have, or at least I've never seen one, okay? And you know, and not to get off track here, in all the places I've been, I just finished a study for the city of Worcester, okay? Second largest city in New England, right? What was it, 560 non-union positions. I only did non-union. When I asked the city manager in Worcester for an organizational chart, he couldn't give me one. Now, I happen to think the city manager's a good guy, and I think he's doing a great job, don't get me wrong. But as I said to him privately, don't you think you should have been able to give me an org chart just between you and me? I mean, seriously. How come you don't have one? It was the gist of the conversation I had with him privately. Once this plan's approved, then your org chart needs to match it. Or this plan, excuse me, I said it the wrong way. The classification plan needs to match your organizational plan. So that as you make changes going forward, you know, and John has shared with me some of the changes that are going on, and it's been a while since I've been here, so I'm sure there's been more changes. That's what we're trying to capture, is that process to make changes. As you make management changes in terms of different levels of accountability, what all I'm suggesting is you have a compensation plan that's directly linked to it. It's joined at the hip. Okay? So that, you know, change is a given. You know, you're going to be changing all the time. The question every single time, with no exception, is how significant is the change? You know, does the change that you're asking someone to take on, let's say, more responsibility, let's say it's a current employee, is it significant enough to warrant additional compensation? Yes or no? And explain to me how you did it, which is why I started out by saying compensation. Hopefully, you're getting a sense of, what we're talking about today. And I think hopefully, particularly a board like this one that's committed, dedicated to the HR function, right? Whereas the selectmen have a lot of things on their plate. We don't expect the selectmen, at least I would never expect a selectman, to know how to do this. But I would expect them to have enough common sense to recognize that, well, we happen to have an advisory board over here that we do expect to know enough about it, so they can give us a recommendation, they can give us an opinion. Just as we expect the town administrator, if you read the job description for a town administrator and you read the policies that I've recommended, state in black and white terms who's responsible for all this, who's accountable. I like that word, accountable. It's, make no mistake about it, it's the town administrator, not the department head. But when I met with your department heads, I said to them point blank, in my opinion, and I can easily say this, they don't work for me, but make no mistake about it, your job description is going to say you need to know how to do this. That's one of, maybe it's a new aspect of your job that you never realized, but guess what? We expect you to know enough about how this process works so that when you go to advocate for one of your employees to be paid more money, you're more effective at doing it than not knowing anything about the process. If you make the mistake of saying, it's not my plan, go see the town administrator, think again. Because your job description says you need to know how to do it. And if you tell one of your employees you don't have anything to do with it, something's wrong. Either the job description is wrong or what you're doing is wrong. Right? And, I've tried to be very specific or explicit with your department heads particularly to make sure they understand they're going to be expected, I hope, at least I'm recommending it for what it's worth, that they know how to do this. Right? Not that they're responsible for the whole plan, because it doesn't say that they are. They're only responsible for their individual department. Okay? And so that's the classification plan, plain and simple. Let's just talk about compensation, if it's okay. So the first thing we did in terms of compensation was we asked Michelle to give us a list of what everyone's current rate of pay is and how long they've been in their current position. And then in addition to that, working with John, we surveyed the marketplace, and you have a chart. So basically, there's two really important charts relative to compensation. One is the summary, right? And then the other one, if you look at the top of the page.
Don, I just have to clarify one thing.
Yeah, sure.
Working with John means that I didn't have anything to do with touching the data that was collected from other towns, because that'll be the first thing is that I tampered with it. The data is the data. I had nothing to do with the collection of it, or the, so.
Yeah, no,
Just-
I'm glad you mentioned that.
You know how it goes.
No, and you're right, but even to further that one step further, from my standpoint, I can sit here and tell you that I collected the data. Not only can I tell you I collected the data, I can tell you from whom did I collect it from. The reason why I say it to you that way is what I never, ever do is use like the MMA survey that you've probably seen, right? Or any other professional group. It's not unusual. I think your library director, I can't remember, I think she might have been, it's not unusual for a department head like assessors, they belong to associations, and they give me a copy of their association survey, and I'm happy to look at it, don't get me wrong, but I don't base my numbers on any other survey. I have to be 100%. Now, when I'm talking to somebody on the phone and they fill out a form, that is one of the reasons why the market data is just not that reliable. One of the reasons being, and I've had it happen to me many, 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 many times, too many times that I care to think about, where I'll call the same municipality back, or it could be a county or whatever, for the same information, and depending upon who I talk to, I get different data. So that does happen. And I mean, that's good news and bad news. The bad news is it's not always accurate. Am I going to swear to it on a Bible? No, I'm not going to do that for you, because I can't guarantee it. But the fact is that what I would submit to you, what's more important is how we use that market data, recognizing that it's just not that accurate. Not only it may be inaccurate in terms of who filled out the form, but it's also inaccurate. I think the assessor, the gentleman that was here before, alluded to the fact what we have not taken the time to do at all is look at a position in another town and let's say do a desk audit. In other words, review what that you know, they may be titled the same, but you and I both know titles don't necessarily mean anything, because that person in that particular community, I mean, you've got people here in some of your titled positions that are doing more than I've seen in other similar titled positions, or they might be doing less. I mean, it
You're
varies.
not really comparing apples to apples.
Right, which is my long-winded way of saying to you why internal equity is more important than external. You need to know it. You know, I could tell, obviously, the gentleman was concerned about, you know, the rate of unemployment, or, you know, the market rate of pay in the marketplace. I mean, that's important to know, but for a lot of reasons, and I've only cited a couple, it's just not as important. We don't want to blow it out of proportion, but yet, you know, here again, all the municipalities I've worked with over the 20 years I've been doing it, when I ask them to explain to me how they're doing it today, if I would ask you to explain to me how you're doing it here today, you're placing so much emphasis on what I would consider to be potentially unreliable data. It really puts into question, I think, the credibility of just using market data. It just is not the best way to do it. You can do it. I mean, you've been doing it. Far be it from me. That's the way I used to do it when I was a town manager. I didn't know any other way to do it. Nobody ever told me, right? I mean, this is not rocket science here.
That
Well-
makes a huge amount of sense. What
Yeah.
you just said makes a whole lot of sense.
Right, particularly when I deal with collective bargaining groups. You know, I always begin studies when I'm working with, and most of my studies have been with collective bargaining groups. I always ask them point blank, can you explain to me, you know, I've looked at your contract, and I've looked at specifically the section having to do with compensation. Tell me how this works. And again, I've never had anybody be able to explain it. My second question, which I asked all your employees, is do you want to know how it works? Is it in your best interest? Do you want to know why your position's paid more than or less than? I don't mean to pick on Michelle here, but she's sitting right here. She wants to know. How do I know that? Because I've asked her, right? And well, I asked your employees the same question. Now, not every one of them answered the question. I don't want to, you know, they didn't take a vote or, you know, sign your name or whatever. But I can assure you, most people do want to know. I mean, I can't think why you wouldn't want to know. But there are some people that don't care. But that's neither here nor there, you know, whether they do or they don't, that's their issue, right? So the next important chart, there's really two of them, is at the top, it's an Excel spreadsheet that simply at the top says proposed salary range to survey data, if you look at the header at the top. Because what this second chart does is explains to you, if you look at the middle of that, so I'm looking at the proposed salary range to survey data chart, right, this Excel spreadsheet. So, yeah, that's it. And if you look at the
The
header
one
at
that
the
says
top,
proposed salary ranges? Okay.
that's the one. Of all the charts in this report, that's probably ultimately the most important one. Because this shows you the 6 grade levels, right, on the left-hand side. And again, if you want to know why a position is at a particular grade level, the dollars and cents were not the primary criteria. We used them, and I'll walk you through how we've used the dollars and cents. But it was the classification process that determined initially what grade level a position should be classified at. So if you look at the middle of the salary range survey chart, the 3 middle columns, and they're entitled Fiscal FY 2020 Salary Survey Minimum, Midpoint, and Max, right? Everybody see those 3 middle columns? If you go over to the next, to the left, the 3 columns that are entitled Proposed Salary Range Minimum, Benchmark, and Maximum. The word benchmark means the survey average midpoint for that grade level. So you see the number in grade level 1, $20.45, right? Everybody see that?
Yeah.
That number is calculated by taking the 3 survey midpoint numbers that you see for the positions in grade level 1, add them up and divide by 3. And if you jump down to the next grade level, you see the $20.67. If you do the same thing with the survey average midpoint data, that's how we get that benchmark number. So the word benchmark is defined as nothing more than a market-driven compensation number.
So I just want an explanation, further explanation.
Sure.
That, let's look at level 1, which is, the benchmark is 2045.
Right.
you would have looked at all of the positions that would have been comparable to that in this survey here of all the different towns,
Right.
taken the average, and that would have been the benchmark.
And specifically the midpoint average,
Okay, midpoint,
the mean.
the mean, all right. Mean is different
the
than
median.
average. Mean is
No,
different.
mean is average.
Mean is average, median is different.
Whoa, trying to catch me. You know, I once had I'll never forget him, God, as long as I live. There was a selectman up, I think it was up in Maine somewhere, and as soon as I said what I just said, he immediately raised his hand and said, "Why aren't you using the median?" I went, whoa.
No, you said mean, which is the average, not
Right.
the median, okay.
So if you want to know where the survey data comes from, right, all you have to do is look at another set of charts that basically tell you the, who we surveyed and how they responded, okay, on a position-by-position basis. So behind that $20.45 are the survey average midpoint numbers, just as the average minimum, maximum numbers are three pieces of paper, because it's, I mean, another set of charts that simply tell you where the data came from, how many responses, and who responded to what, okay? So for now, just to walk you through the process, we rule out the lows and the highs of the market data because it's so unreliable, and we focus on the midpoint, and specifically the survey average midpoint. And then we use the benchmark as a guide. No one gets paid $20.45 automatically. Nobody. Now, before I get to the employee part, if you just go down the column for benchmark and just look at all 6 grade levels, we didn't make those numbers up. Those are actual numbers. We're not making them up, right? Once we collected the market data, we plugged them in, and then you can see the average midpoint or benchmark numbers that we got. You notice how they've graduated from one grade level to another, right? What that says to me is that the market data that we've collected is consistent with the levels of responsibility that we've defined. And we never know what that's going to look like until we collect the market data, okay? Because we did it independent of the market data. We classified the positions without looking at any dollars and cents. But yet there's, when I look at that benchmark number for each of the 6 grade levels, you can see what I'm talking about. So there's no fixed percentage, there's no same number, it's not formula driven, it's actual market data, okay? So the minimum maximum you see, let's go back to grade level 1, and you see it on the summary chart, right? If you want to know for grade level 1, well, how did we get $16.36? That seems like an awfully odd number, right? All I've done in developing the range so that I can sit here today and tell you it's competitive, quote unquote, is I've taken a percentage of the benchmark to be the minimum. Happens to be 80%. There's nothing magical about 80, right? And then when I had a minimum number, I multiplied it by a percentage differential, or a percentage number, in this case 60%, because it's been why 60%? Well, most plans I've ever looked at, my objective is to get a range that's wide enough compared to the market data that you don't have to change it every year. Because no one, let me repeat, no employee automatically gets paid a minimum or a maximum, or for that matter, the benchmark. Those minimum maximum numbers are there strictly as guides to define the word competitive. Well, how do I know that? Look at the 1636 to 2618. And if you go over to the right-hand side of the chart, you see the percentage numbers, right? Everybody with me? Mm-hmm. So the accounting assistant, the survey data we collected minimum was $21.31. When you compare that to 1636, you can see that 1636 is about 30% below or less than the survey average minimum for that position. And you can do the same thing for each position, right? It's right there in front of you. What I'm most concerned about, for me to show you a range structure, which is what you see in the summary chart, right, is I wanted to have it wide enough, that, as I just said, is competitive with the market data, so that the proposed maximum to the survey average maximum is the most important number for me, which is why you see all those plus numbers, right? Now, there's no magic number, there's no magic percentage differential. It's not formula driven. You get to subjectively decide what that should be. How wide do you want your range to be? That's your decision to make. I'm just making a recommendation, right? So I don't want you to feel constrained or you know, if we don't approve these exact numbers, you know, the whole system falls apart. Far from it.
I guess I'm confused.
Yeah?
Is this what you're saying is your proposal for your
That's my
ranges?
proposed
These are
structure.
your proposals. This section right here, not necessarily these are other optional numbers?
The minimum, maximum, no, I haven't described the whole chart to you
Oh,
yet.
you said market equity pay band, all right.
Right.
I
Let me get to that next, all right?
Oh, well, I have to leave in like 3 minutes.
All right, well, in 1
So-
minute, okay?
And I have to ask a question then of Jonathan. Do you want any kind of action taken on this today? Because there won't be a quorum.
No, I think I think it'll hold. What I'm trying to do is, like I said, try to get the classification, the way we classify positions, at least in the queue for the selectmen to approve.
So, Michelle, if you would take some notes on what Mr. Jacobs explains in the end, and I want to really thank you for doing.
You can do a follow-up to this?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, this is a lot of information, and I hope you can understand why I began this morning by talking about communication.
I think,
I don't expect you to necessarily, you know,
I just want to
completely
give you
understand.
kudos in the way you presented. Being an ex-teacher, the key to anything is knowledge of your information and communication.
Right.
And I think that you are an outstanding communicator as far as presenting information in a way that is highly understandable.
Communicates the hell out of it, doesn't he?
It's very understandable. I'm not a numbers person, I'm a word person, that's my forte, and this was explained so well. I mean, I really feel badly I have to get to this
Before you
other.
leave,
We schedule another meeting.
let's do another, now that everybody's gotten this thrown at them, maybe we just take it home and we digest it, and we do another meeting, and Don comes back so that we can have.
I would
specific-
love that.
Yeah, so
Finish
between
it
now
up.
and then, obviously, what I would encourage you to do is look at the grade levels, the characteristic chart, look at the, now you have a sense of the minimum, maximum numbers, they're really floating numbers. And let me just add one other thing. This is a market-driven compensation plan, quote-unquote. You now understand why I can say market-driven. So the only number that I've explained to you, by the way, is how we've used the survey average midpoint. On that same chart, when you go back and look at it, you'll notice the second column are the current rates of pay. And then if you look over in the far right-hand column, you see the years of service. Okay? Remember, there's 3 criteria that define competitive. All that information is on that one chart. So very simply, how I used it was I picked anybody, I don't care who you want to pick, and I'm just looking at grade level 1. Pick anybody and then go over to the far right-hand side and then look at how long they've been in the current position, right? So that one of the library aides apparently has been there 10 years. Well, you would think after 10 years, they'd be paid competitively, right? Under normal circumstances, quote-unquote. Well, guess what? 1681 is about 21% below the survey benchmark. That's not competitive. That's a problem, in my opinion. So what I'm recommending to you is that you're able to go through this literally on an employee-by-employee basis, and for you to make a determination whether someone today is being paid competitively. Now, I'm talking about the employee, and I really want to step away from that for the time being. I'd much hold your concerns about the employee part of this until we meet the next time.
Okay.
What I want you to focus on, what I'm asking you to focus on, is strictly the position. As hard as it might be, because you might know somebody who's in a particular position, we're only talking about the position. And so when John used, when he made the statement a minute ago about recommending a plan, I just want to make sure that we're using the same definition. Plan means both grade levels and salary ranges. You can't do one without the other. They're joined at the hip. So what I'm asking you to do, what I'm recommending for you to do, is to recommend a plan to the Board of Selectmen that consists of grade levels and salary ranges, both. Don't leave out the ranges. Once the board gives tentative approval, just as you're giving tentative approval, it's not a final decision, then you're ready to talk about the employee. And until you see the employee part, I would submit to you, you're really not, I don't know how you could be completely comfortable with the position part. They go together, obviously, the employee's in the position, right? All I'm saying, and let me just sum it up, just one last thing. What I'm suggesting to you today, leading up to the employee part, is that competitiveness, whether I'm being paid competitively today, is, in my opinion, a valid criteria to determine whether I should be paid more money or how much, okay? The compensation of the employee, what I'm really trying to suggest to you, what I am suggesting to you, is that you should do away with the practice of giving everybody the same percentage. I can't say that enough. You know, on my tombstone, if I have one, which I don't think I will, I'd like you to put that on there if you don't mind. Nobody should be paid a percentage increase. Yet every municipality does it. Every one. I think that's totally inequitable. It's unfair, not only to the town and the employee. Somehow there's something gets lost in translation. I don't know how much clearer I can be with you. People should be paid a dollar amount, not a percentage. But yet every municipality uses percentages. It's the easy way to do it. That's the way I used to do it. Everybody, you know, in my 15 years of being a town manager, I never had a single employee, nobody, ever asked me, how did I get that percentage? Or why am I being paid the same percentage as everybody else? Never asked that question once in 15 years. And I was only a town manager. Southbridge, Amherst, and Plymouth, to be exact. Nobody ever asked me. Thank God they never did, because I don't think I could have explained it, to tell you the truth. I didn't know any other way to do it. What I said to John when we first met, now that I know that John wants to manage compensation, is what really excites me the most, as you can probably tell, is the employee part. The position part's pretty cut and dry. It's pretty straightforward once you get used to it. It's the employee part. The last thing I just want to leave you with is maybe put in the back of your mind is consider some other ways to pay employees more money. Let me sum it up very simply. Consider the possibility of using, I was going to say responsibility, using accountability as a criteria to determine how much money to pay someone. Now I am talking about the employee. I've already suggested accountability is a very, very valid, in fact, is the way you should determine primarily how to pay a position. And I've just walked you through it, right? I would submit to you the same principle applies to your employee, particularly your managers. You know, and it's just the nature of who I am, right? I mean, they didn't ask me to say what I'm saying. Trust me, they.
You really have to.
But what I am saying to you is give that some thought, you know, when it's all said and done. But first, recommend a plan to the board, and how often do you guys meet?
We need a
you would-
motion to adjourn,
If you
right?
would like to set up another time with these ladies and with Dawn that it works, I'm pretty much at home now for the next several weeks because Jay has his surgery tomorrow. So, and John, this is my email address, just in case you have the wrong address, and that's an underscore, not a hyphen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your patience. I do appreciate it, and I apologize for the amount of time, but there is a lot of information there.
And I don't want it to be rushed. I do want us to have, you know, a full
Right.
understanding of it. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
I make a motion to adjourn.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, the meeting is adjourned.